2 years ago, when I was a freshman at Lincoln University, I lived in the on-campus accommodation. It's a fairly standard, boring accommodation and relatively new in terms of when it was built. Basically nothing extraordinary. Anyway, our flat was a bit of a weird one. I was the girl at university whose boyfriend casually moved into the flat, and I was very glad of it towards the end. I don't really remember exactly what the first thing that happened was, but there was always sounds like someone was walking above our rooms. We were the top floor apartment, hence why that's so odd. And the sound of keys, like the old-fashioned big set of keys maintenance would have had, even though our flats had FOB keys and a universal key, so the maintenance man only ever had 2 keys. The sound of our front door of our flat opening, and then no one coming or going, etc. Little things like that. But the weirder things I do remember. I was incredibly ill for about a week, literally couldn't get out of bed most days, and so I slept a lot. And I remember waking up at 10 a.m. to a text from my flatmate asking me to be quiet, as she could hear me laughing and shouting with my boyfriend, having the best time of our lives. I was the middle room, she had the one next to the living room, and my flatmates, let's just say, were not the most social type, wouldn't have been in the living room. She was adamant she heard me and was a little shaken by this. A couple of nights later was November 5th, and I was still so ill. It was 9 p.m., and I could just hear the same Linkin Park songs on repeat my flatmate always listened to, and the distinctive sound of her less than pleasant fake laugh. As I picked up my phone to text her and asked her to keep it down as I was so ill, I got a Snapchat from her. She wasn't in her room, but out watching fireworks. I swear, as soon as I saw the Snapchat, all sounds just stopped. Fast forward to December 30th, and everyone in the flat had gone home for Christmas. Before I go on, I must point out no one has a key to each other's rooms, and I mean no one. I had a job, and so had to commute to work over the holidays, and was going to stay in the flat for one night to avoid the train. The second I opened the door into my room, I felt like I'd walked into a fog and my heart sank. The posters on my wall were all off and lying on the floor. Okay, they could have just fallen. The bunting, which had been pinned and hammered into the wall, was laying on a line on my bed. My shoes were out in pairs from under my bed. And my notice board where I kept my earrings hung in pairs. Clearly I'm very studious. The pairs were all jumbled up. My alarm clock was 2 meters away from where I kept it, with the alarm set 3 hours wrong, and the time set wrong too. Needless to say, I turned off the lights and I left. I sat at the train station for an hour before the next train home, and as the train went past the apartment, the train line runs through the unit, I saw our living room light on. I immediately texted all my flatmates, and each said they were in their respective home cities. My boyfriend came back with me when I needed to come back for good, as the rest of the flat wouldn't be returning for a few weeks. I went on a night out with my friends back home, and so left him in my flat alone. He swears he heard my other flatmates talking about him, walking to each other's rooms, playing music, and generally slamming doors. He walked to the kitchen and saw one of their doors slightly ajar, and so I texted him apologizing for him being there and explaining where I was. Her reply, "That's okay. I'm not back until next Tuesday." So we went to recheck her door, and it was locked. Rather than a bathroom, we all had ensuite wet rooms, which often wouldn't dry as the door closed, and the extractor fan was permanently broken. My clever way of solving this was to hang the shower curtain over the door to keep the door from closing. This always worked, yet on numerous nights, both me and my boyfriend could hear the sounds of someone picking up the shower curtain and moving it as though the door shouldn't be open. Every time I had a shower, my boyfriend would swear he heard me talking to him and ignoring him at the same time. It was all very odd. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you're probably thinking that university, first year, alcohol was probably involved. And yes, I did drink and go out numerous times staying there, but most of the weirdest things happened when I was stone cold sober. I've even omitted stories from when I was intoxicated, as I just can't be sure they were real. The one thing that probably shook me up the most was meeting a second-year student and discussing where I lived with them to find out they once lived in my exact same flat, but the room across from mine. I still think the most unnerving thing was having the same experiences I've described, being asked of me as a "have you heard the keys?" or someone walking above you, or had things move, just a few weeks before I was set to move out permanently. The whole thing still rattles me, and though we don't really always get along, as my flatmates and we rarely agreed on anything, we all agree that we more than likely did live in a haunted apartment, and that the guy in room 1 cannot hold his drink. I would like to share my story of what happened to me during my encounter with the paranormal. I always knock on wood when I say, please show me a sign that everything is going to be okay, and that's where my story begins. My husband, my son age 3 and daughter age 1 and myself lived 1.5 miles in the woods. This was many years ago. My son is 16 now and my daughter is 12. I became sick and had a few financial issues I was concerned about. One day, I just said out loud, please show me a sign that everything will be okay. 2 days go by, and my husband and myself are watching TV around 11 o'clock. That is when I believe it all began. Our microwave that we had for a while made a noise, and the numbers were pushed to the start microwave at 5 minutes. We turn our heads to see the numbers going down, 459, 458, 457, and it keeps going. We stop it. I said, maybe that was my sign that everything was going to be alright. I highly believed in the paranormal, and angels and spirits, so I brushed it off and we finished watching our show. The very next night, around the same time at night, we heard a faint knock at the front door. Mind you, our closest neighbor was 1.5 miles away. Who was knocking at our door at 11 o'clock at night? My husband gets up and opens the door, and no one was there. He walked outside, all around the house, and no one was outside. Our kids was sleeping during these two events. It began happening more and more. Weird noises, lights turning on and off, and then I seen it for the very first time. I was taking a shower in a stand-up shower. The glass was shaded a bit white, but you could still see out of the glass. I turned around to rinse my hair out and seen a man holding his hands next to his eyes, looking into the shower on the glass, as he would look, as if you were looking into a window. I screamed so loud, I was shaking. My husband had no clue what was wrong. He came running in, and I told him what happened, and I stood there with the shower door open and asked him to stand there and let me get the soap out of my hair. I was so afraid. That night went by, and I wouldn't leave my husband's side. Days were going by, and everything was still for a few days. We had a stereo that was hooked up to surround sound in our living room, and the volume button was a huge circle you turn up or down to control the volume. We were watching TV again one night, and watched the circle on the stereo move, and the volume went way up. My husband yelled, "Okay, that's enough," and we watched it move back down. It would turn up while I was on the phone, or if we were outside, we could hear it inside. I still have the same stereo to this day, and it has never done it again after those events occurred. I would smell a man's cologne that was very strong at times. It would come for a few seconds and then go. So I went to look and make sure one of my little ones didn't break a bottle of my husband's cologne somewhere, but nothing. Time kept going by, and again, one night, while we were sleeping, I woke up to use the restroom to see a shadow standing by my husband's knees on his side of the bed. I was so scared, I pulled the blanket up over my eyes and prayed for whatever it was to go away. It seemed as time would go by, things were becoming more of an issue. I would feel cold touches on my back, and no one was there. I was so afraid during the days I would go visit my mother when my husband was working because I didn't want to be left at home alone with the kids and whatever it was at my house. I got Bibles and opened a Bible in each room and had it laying there and would read a verse each day. Then it seemed as time went by, it was slowly beginning to stop. I'd ask for whatever was there to please leave. It finally stopped and things were going back to normal, and I did research on the land to see if something was wrong with the property. Coming across a ton of research, I found out that in the back part of our marked land, a man was killed in a hunting accident. I froze and could not believe it. So, to this day I say, if you do not believe, you have not had it happen to you. After 4 years, I ended up having another child. He was 4 years old and my mother passed away. My mother believed in the paranormal very much so and was just as interested in it as I was. My family was totally lost without her, so my family moved in with my father into the house that I grew up in and my mother passed away in. I remember having a conversation with my mom saying to her, "If something happens to you, please let me know you're okay." She was very sick and was on dialysis and wasn't doing very well. She laughed and told me she would. She passed away on a Monday, and I believe I got my first sign from her on a Wednesday. I was at the doctor's and received a ticket with the number 21 on it. That was the day she passed away. Leaving the doctor's, her song was on the car on the radio, and I came to a red light and the car in front of me had a sticker on it that said, "In memory of Mom." Right then and there, I cried and knew she was okay. What were the chances of me being behind that car at that moment? Very odd. We are living in my parents' house to this day. My father moved into a smaller house, and odd things started happening here. I would see a shadow walking up and down the hall. I would see a shadow in the kitchen, and see it in all the spots she would be when she was here. My little one grew up and was 3 years old when he started to tell me he was seeing May May in the house. That was what my other two kids called my mom when she was here. He didn't know who she was. He was only 4 months old when she passed. He's 8 years old now and still sees her and tells me what she says. He has validated things that only my mother and myself knew. So I knew my little one was seeing her. I believed it. So I tell him not to be afraid of her. She is here to visit, to look after him and his brother and sister. There are many, many more stories I can share about my child when it comes to our house now, but I can share that at another time. I used to be afraid, but I'm much better now. I have an angel looking over my family. This story takes place back when I was around 17 to 18. I am now 33 years of age. It all began with my brother Shane and his obsession with a Ouija board we owned at the time. We bought the board more for me since I was the big Ouija freak, but somehow I ended up using a lot less than everyone else. My mom wouldn't even touch it, fearing something evil would happen, but my kids couldn't help keep their hands off of it. You know how teenagers are, defiant and ignorant. My brother Shane, sister Misty, our cousin Christy, and I would sit down and play with the board. Lots of times we were acting silly, laughing as we played. I guess we figured they were fake, and not much to them. I wish I had been right, but as it turns out, I was more wrong than I had ever imagined. As these little get-togethers on weekends went by, most of us became less interested in playing with the Ouija and more interested in other things. However, Shane had an obsessive thought that he wanted to investigate. He wanted to see if the board would work with only him touching the planchet. I warned him not to do it, but of course, he didn't listen. Shane found out after about 2 or 3 times that the board worked with just him playing it. It was slow at first, but the more he played with it, the faster the planchette would move and spell out answers. These sessions served to only draw Shane deeper into his fascination with the Ouija board. Furthermore, he would spend hours by himself with the board. He started to withdraw and became antisocial. The Ouija became his best friend, or should I say, his only friend. He would sit in his room, door closed for hours on end, even missing meals. Only one thing mattered in his life, the Ouija board. We tried talking to Shane, telling him to put away the board and come out and hang out with us. I even tried putting the Ouija back in its box and hiding it, but he'd wait until I was asleep and hunt it down. My mom threatened to burn it if he didn't stop playing with the Ouija, but he was undaunted. Up until this point, it was still just a game to me, albeit a game that my brother was obsessed with. However, things were about to change as Shane would turn our normal family life into a nightmare. It began with him saying that he could see a woman in white moving around the house, especially at night. He said the woman spoke to him and she would tell him things. We asked him about the conversations, and he would only say that the woman was disappointed or angry at such and such. He saw her as a friend until the night she appeared, looking like she was ready to hurt someone. At that point, I was very jittery and threatening to burn the board myself. Whatever spirit Shane was talking to from the Ouija was obviously playing with his head and starting to show itself in our home. The problems began to escalate on the night my brother told me that he had dreams of killing us and was contemplating actually following through with it. I told my mom and we started locking our bedroom doors at night. It was then when we heard the knocking began. We started hearing knocking on the windows and doors late at night. It was as if someone was beating the heck out of the front door. I started praying until it would stop. The next time, the Ouija spirit appeared as a man. It began with a faint whistling, like someone whistling a song. Of course, we all checked with each other, and nobody in the house was whistling. At night, it would get louder and louder. I could now distinguish that it was definitely a man. In fact, we began to call him Mr. Whistleman. We had told a few close friends, but no one really believed us. That is, until the night my friend Jill was over and experienced what we had been dealing with. Jill was so freaked out that she made me sit up all night with her until her dad could pick her up the next morning. We couldn't get away from Mr. Whistleman as he even followed us on vacation. As I discussed the problems with Shane and what I thought was a safe haven, it was Mr. Whistleman who heard us talking about him, and suddenly we'd hear all the whistling. Our nerves were constantly on edge at home, and the tension was so thick that even a sword couldn't have cut it. The constant knocking, as well as the whistling and Shane's weird moods, were wearing on the rest of my family. My mother and I decided that we had enough and were positive that the root of the problem was the Ouija board. We agreed that it felt as though the problems were escalating and as soon as it would be an all-out war, but at the moment, neither of us saw any light at the end of the tunnel. Strangely enough, it was soon after that discussion that the Ouija board spirit turned into some sort of poltergeist. On one occasion, my sister ran screaming from a back bedroom, saying something tried sitting on the bed. She had been in there napping when she heard what she insisted was the sound of heavy cloven feet coming towards the bed. Then, she felt as if someone or something was sitting down and putting pressure on her. Needless to say, she was terrified. My mom was scared too, and I didn't help matters as I went into panic mode. This thing had already gone after Shane and Misty. Now I was convinced that I was next. In fact, I didn't have to wait too long to find out. It was after midnight of the following night, and everyone was asleep. I suddenly awoke from a nightmare to see my brother sitting on his bed looking at me. I asked him what he was doing, and he said he awoke to see a black shadow with its arms pointed towards me. Apparently, it was then when the shadow noticed him and vanished. So many questions raced through my mind as I struggled to make sense of it all. What was this thing? Why was it after me and my family? Was this ever going to end? It felt as if the spirit was playing with us, like we were its personal toys. It would appear without warning and take on various forms. It was constantly rummaging through the house, unnerving us with all the noise, especially at night. We were exhausted from lack of sleep and always on alert, wondering when and where the next appearance would be. Then came the night it talked to us. More specifically, it spoke directly to me. I'd been talking to Shane, just making conversation, and we got into a disagreement. Suddenly, I heard a voice, plain as day, angrily growl at me. "Leave him alone," it said. It was as plain as if another person had been standing right there with us. My biggest fear was that this entity would possess my brother, but had other prey in mind. My sister Misty was the target now. One night, my sister hadn't been feeling too good. She went to lie down on the couch, and it seemed like she was sick. Suddenly, she made an odd request. She wanted me to remove my Bible from the couch before she would lie down. I asked why, and she said she had the urge to throw it or rip out pages. Well, I felt an urge of my own as I grabbed the Bible and put it against her forehead. Misty started screaming and cursing. Foam was coming out of her mouth, and she threatened to kill. She used language I'd never heard come out of her mouth before, profane and blasphemous things. My mom held her while I held the Bible to her head and prayed out loud. After what seemed an eternity, she finally began to subside. Afterwards, she was completely confused as she asked what we were doing to her. We knew we had to do something immediately, so we ran out into the middle of the street. It was well after midnight as we tried to find someone with a phone. We were all worn out and scared, and definitely not wanting to go back into the house. My dad wanted to take us all and just leave, but we were afraid the thing would just follow us wherever we went. Somehow, we had to fight this thing, and we knew we couldn't do it alone. At this point, we called our pastor, David, last name omitted, and his wife, Patty. They were a Pentecostal preaching husband and wife. I knew they believed in demons and spirits, as there had been many times at church when they explained to us how they turned their lives towards the Lord after dealing with some dark times, including an encounter with demons. We explained what was going on, and they said they'd be there the next day. When they arrived, they instructed us to stay outside as they went in and attempted to clear the house. Although they weren't exactly sure what they would be dealing with, their preference was for us to be safely away from what they thought would be a demon. Of course, we were fine with standing on the sidelines cheering them on. In other words, we were so terrified that we had no intention of even stepping onto the welcome mat outside. After it was over, we asked them what they had seen. They told us they had seen something bad, but wouldn't say what it was. Maybe they didn't want to scare us, I don't know. I do know that the house felt lighter, and I was so happy to have it leave my family alone. Shane hasn't touched another Ouija board since my mother has forbidden having anything of that nature in her home. To this day, I still wonder about that experience, and if we all are truly safe from the evil that presides within the Ouija board. I have a few stories to tell. Some my father told me, one is my own true account, but this one was told to me by my fiance, and it kept me up for a long time that night after I heard this. He said that when he was about 8 or 9 years old, his family moved into a 2-story home that was maybe about 20 years old at the time. His parents slept downstairs, and he and his 4 sisters had bedrooms upstairs. None of the kids wanted to sleep up there because they had nightmares every night about a skeleton woman in a black robe coming out of the closet. This closet was located in the girl's bedroom, but he had the same dreams. He said one night, the girls woke up screaming about the thing in the closet, and their mother raced up the stairs with a broom, beating something in the closet. She said she doesn't remember doing it, even though all the kids watched her do it. One night, not long after, Charles awoke from a deep sleep because he knew something was in the room with him. He tried to yell for his mom and dad, but he couldn't make a sound. He had his knees up to his chin with the covers pulled around him, trying not to breathe. Then something pulled his toe, and then bit it. The covers were shuffling like someone was trying to get in bed with him. He screamed and bolted from the bed. He ran downstairs and spent the rest of the night in his parents' bedroom. Even though his toe hurt for days, there was no bite mark or redness at all. The girls were also having a hard time staying in their rooms. They were so frightened that they spent the whole summer at their grandmother's house. Charles refused to stay one more night in his room, so he started sleeping on the couch. The couch was located off to the side of the staircase. He thought he would be safer if he was downstairs until one night. He was about ready to doze off when he heard something chewing the carpet on the stairs. Then the chewing speeded up so fast that he could feel the vibration from the staircase. Once again, he was too scared to utter a sound, so he lay there, heart pounding, hoping his parents could hear it. They did and called up to him, "Charles, what are you doing out there?" Then, all of a sudden, it stopped. "Mom, hurry, something's eating the carpet." His mother and dad got up, and when they turned on the light, they could see where something had ripped up the threads on the carpet. Each step was almost bare, and the ripped up carpet was nowhere to be found. His dad searched the whole house looking for an animal that may have gotten into the house, but there was no way an animal could have done that in such a short time, and at that speed. They made Charles go back to sleep on the couch. He didn't want to, but finally, after some time, he was getting sleepy. Almost asleep, he suddenly was wide awake. A cold, dead line went down his back. Even though he couldn't see it, he knew it was the skeleton woman running her bony finger all the way down his spine. He thought that he was going to die. He said he wanted to die because he wouldn't be afraid anymore. He made it through that night and ended up going to his grandma's house too. His parents said they were going to try sleeping upstairs, but it didn't last long. After about 3 months, they moved away. His mom and dad do not like to talk about the house. The only thing they will say is they always had a bad feeling when they were in the house. His sisters also confirm his stories and swear something was in that closet, and if they would have stayed there any longer, it would have gotten them all. The house remained empty for about 3 years before it was sold. I would love to do some research on this house and find out what happened, and I wonder if the next tenant had a problem. Okay, here's a theater story for you. Many theaters have ghosts. There's so many ghosts that most actors don't even bother to ask if another actor's theater has a ghost, but rather, who is their ghost and how did they get it? My college has the ghost of a former student who used to spend a great deal of time in the theater, even sleeping in the green room from time to time. One day the student, Bill, died in an accident, but he returned to the theater. He's a very nice ghost who will only show up when a show is going well and the cast gets along. One day, when the stage was completely clear of a set, I was on stage with 2 of my friends. One was singing a song from the Brady Bunch when suddenly a nail, one that was in perfect shape and has never been hammered, fell from above us and landed right next to our foot. It has always been common around the theater to have Bill's name always up on the call board with his peg in the in spot. One day, a new member erased his name. My friend and I noticed when we came in the next day, so we rewrote it and moved the peg back in before proceeding to the dressing rooms. We were the only people there that day. We commented on some makeup we had forgotten to buy as we settled into our usual spaces in the dressing room and checked to make sure the drawers were empty and clean, which they were. The next day, when we came in, my friend was going to put a box with her jewelry in her drawer and noticed a plain brown bag in it. During the run of that show, there was a long period of time where I had to stand with my back leaning on the railing of a staircase. Even though every member was out on stage in front of me, there were 2 or 3 nights when I would feel the staircase shake as if someone were running up and down it behind me. And one night, while this was happening, the sounds of someone walking on it were heard by several of the cast members, but none of the audience members. The green room is often freezing, but is warmed up whenever someone asked Bill if he would mind leaving us alone so we would catch a nap before our next show or class. Many people, and myself included, have been warm 1 minute and then suddenly freezing cold while the next person next to them remains warm. When this happens, you can walk around as much as you want and you would still be freezing. A few times, people who have been standing next to each other have both been freezing on only half their bodies. Bill has also been seen several times by different people. The director, who was his teacher when Bill was a student, has seen him several times, as well as an ex-technical director and several students. One time, when the TD and a student were working late on a set, a man in a plaid shirt and overalls appeared in the room, even though all the outside doors were locked at the time. They called out to him, but he didn't turn around, so they walked over to him, and he vanished before they could get to him. During one of the rehearsals for a play, another friend and I were sitting in an aisle and talking when a movement in the light booth caught my attention. Since no one was supposed to be up there, I glanced up at the booth and saw a man in a plaid shirt leaning over the ledge of the open window, watching the rehearsal. I motioned to my friend who also saw the man. When we looked back again, the booth was vacant and the window closed. Thinking the door was unlocked and maybe someone had gotten up in there, we told one of the boys, well actually men, they're in their 20s, to check to see, but they returned a short time later because the door to the booth was locked and the TD had gone home long ago, and the TD was the only person other than the director running rehearsal who had a key. Another time, during an outside show, the boy running lights from the light booth in the theater heard a sound level with the booth, several feet above the floor of the theater, and when he opened the window to the theater, he saw a flashing light in the air and no one in the building. There are many more stories, ranging from objects being hidden and reappearing to the lights going out during performances for unknown reasons. Thank you for reading. Working for a distribution company in Surrey, England, I used to work nights, finishing about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. There were 2 routes I could take to walk home, the quickest of which is across Mitcham Common, which I elected to take on this particular occasion. I never feared walking across the common and was a skeptic when it came to believing in ghosts and such like. However, I will never forget my experience. As I had just passed the 7 islands, a group of large ponds in the common with, surprisingly enough, 7 islands, I heard a sound coming towards me which resembled wheels traveling across the grass. I was right, it was just a cyclist. What concerns me was that he was riding his bicycle at the time in the morning, particularly since this boy was only about 7 or 8 years of age. This in itself did not frighten me as such, until I noticed him with a fixed gaze on me. Even as the bike had gone past me, I turned around and noticed that he was still staring at me, now looking over his shoulder as he continued to cycle forwards. How could he control the bicycle like this? As my mind asked more and more questions, what followed really scared the life out of me. The boy on the bicycle, still staring at me over his shoulder, continued to carry on cycling, but across the water. The bike was on the surface of the water, and there was now no sound of the chain or the wheels turning, just silence, and the boy, wearing all white, continuing across the ponds and into the distance. I ran home, and could not stop thinking about this incident for weeks. My mind started working overtime. Had a young boy drowned there? Perhaps after cycling on ice which had broken? I never did research this for fear of what I might discover. When I was just 7 years old, we moved into the house on the corner of Elm and 3rd Street. It was a rather large Victorian home, built in the 1830s by the first undertaker in the town, and it was also the second oldest building in town. From the outside, it seemed kind of small, but once you were inside, there was an endless possibility of rooms to explore, both upstairs and down. Across the street was the oldest graveyard in town, and the oldest church, the stately Primitive Baptist Church, built in the 1850s. The second we stepped inside our new home, bags in hand and marveling at the beautiful rooms, I began to notice a really strange feeling. Everywhere we went was as if someone was behind me, curiously inspecting their weird new guests. It didn't seem unfriendly, so I just tried to let it pass, but the presence got stronger and stronger as we mounted the steps to the 2nd floor. I noticed the odd presence the most in the master bedroom, the room that had once housed a large pool table, and a little girl's bedroom. Most of the old furnishings were still in the house, so her room still had many dolls, and an old iron bed complete with mattresses. The presence was especially strong when we went up and down the many steps in the house. It was as if the spirit, or whatever it was following us up the steps very, very closely. It was odd. It was like I was the only one that could feel it, as my mother and sister continued to jabber aimlessly and drag me in and out of every room they happened upon. When we came back the second day, it was just me and my mother, and I begged to be able to stay downstairs so I wouldn't have to encounter the strange things upstairs. She agreed, but thought I was making this whole thing up since I was so little. I stayed downstairs in the living room, which seemed alright. However, when I sat in the large picture window that overlooked the garden, I began to feel it again. This time, it was stronger than before. It was like something or someone was standing outside in the garden, looking in at me. It was so strong that I jumped up and started crying and screaming for my mother, and she quickly came downstairs. I persuaded her to take me back to the apartment, that I wasn't feeling well, and we did. The first night that we slept in the house was a week later. The old owners had come by and had given us the key and joked a while about us buying the house. My mom could not understand why they thought it was so funny that we would actually want to live there. That night, I was awakened by the sound of footsteps coming up the steps next to my room. I jumped out of bed. Since my mom worked all night, I thought it might be her coming home from work, so I ran out into the landing to give her a surprise hug. The footsteps continued closer and closer, but no one was there. I turned on the light to get a better look, and still, no one. I screamed and ran into my sister's room, which just happened to be the master bedroom where I felt some very strong presences in the first day we visited the house. She was sitting up in bed shivering, and I said, "Did you hear that?" She replied, "Yes, yes, yes." She told me that before the footsteps had started, she had been awakened by the sound of something or someone going through her algebra homework and throwing her books to the floor. Each time she had gotten up and turned on the light, it had stopped, and when she turned off the light and tried to go to sleep, it had started again. We huddled together the rest of the night and didn't say anything to Mom in the morning. The next week or so, my sister got a job, and I was alone in the house almost all day. I was in her room, taking a nap, and all I had to cover up with was some old sweaters and clothes she had carelessly left on her bed. Since we had not unpacked all of our things, I pulled all of the clothes over me and was getting very comfortable when an hour or so later, I was awakened by a strange presence. I didn't even open my eyes immediately since I was very frightened, and this time it was stronger than ever. When I did have the guts to open my eyes, there she was. There was a woman dressed all in white, and it looked like a nightgown from the 1800s. She was leaning very, very close to me, right over me, and she was smiling. I was staring transfixed and paralyzed with fear. It was clear that she meant no harm, but I was scared stiff. I closed my eyes and silently tried to will her away and prayed to every god that I could think of, hoping that it would work. When I opened my eyes, she was gone, but I could still feel her in the room. Even to this day, we still get visits from this woman. We went to the cemetery next door and found the graves of the original owners and found out that her name is Viola Baumgartner. We can hear voices in the house sometimes, and we cannot understand what they are saying. We think this is because the people who built the house were German. While remodeling, we found empty beer bottles in the walls and a pair of suspenders. They were very old and rotten. We took them to my stepdad, who had lived in Germany for a few years, and he said that they indeed looked German in origin. There's more than one ghost in the house. There are two male spirits. One is an old man in a gray shirt, and the other is a young man with black hair and a black beard. They are very active and visible. They often follow me around the house, down the steps, and into the kitchen. At night they slam doors and walk up and down the steps. They are not malevolent or mean in any way. They seem genuinely curious about us and show no signs of trying to hurt anyone. We have no problems with them. After all, this is their house. They built it, so why not let them stay? This is all true, mind you, and this still happens to this day. When my parents moved to the apartment my mother still lives in today, I noticed that it had some quirks. You see, the apartment has a few mischievous occupants I call gremlins. They tend to take items for a while and then relocate them later on. I will explain. One day, my mom left $20 in the front pocket of her jeans. She realized sometime later that she needed to run to the store, so she went back to her room to get the money. After a few minutes, she called out to me, saying that she needed help. She couldn't find the money, so she asked me to look in the pocket. I didn't find it either. I searched quite a few times before I turned to her and asked if she was mistaken. Had she taken out the money before? Was she wearing a different pair of jeans? Was she sure she placed the money in her jeans and not in a jacket? And she replied no to each question. Alright, Mom, you know how this house is. We'll wait for about 20 minutes and look again. Mom did, as I suggested, opting to read a book in the kitchen for a while. After about an hour, she went back to check. Where was the money? Where did she find it? In the same pocket I had checked at least 6 times 30 minutes before. She is not the only victim to these little practical jokers. One night, my best friends, Coralie, Mia, and Ralph, came over to chit-chat. Sometime later, I felt the need to smoke a cigarette, Newports at the time. Unfortunately, being a college student, neatness was not my forte. My coffee table was cluttered with everything from magazines to jewelry. So, knowing I put a pack on this mountain of stuff, I continued to talk while I searched. Frustrated after a few moments, I pleaded with my friends to help me take everything off of the table so I could find the Newports. We shook out magazines, cleared off the table, even threw out some stuff, but the pack just simply was not there. The closest thing that matched the coloring of the pack was an empty Noxum carton. Well, I figured I'd just grab a cigarette from my mom. So, we straightened up the table and continued to talk. After some time, while puffing and chit-chatting away, I managed to look at the table, which of course was right in front of me, and saw my pack of cigarettes nestled between the pages of a magazine. I said, "Oh guys, you are not going to believe this," and I picked up the pack. The look of shock on each of their faces was undeniable. Now, before this episode, I had spoken to them about going-ons in my house, but each time I received a polite, "Sure, whatever you say," coupled with a "I don't believe you" eye roll. To this day, my friends are believers, and I'm positive that these little guys are not the only ones sharing living space with my mom. One night, Coralie was over for dinner. Doing our usual thing, we sat in my living room talking of nothing and everything. Suddenly, it hit me. I smelled fried fish. "Don't you smell it too?" I asked. Of course she didn't, until a few minutes later, when the smell left me. Back and forth, for over an hour, the smell drifted between us, changing once in a while to the scent of fresh flowers. After a while, it faded until we could no longer smell it. I don't know who it was or what it was trying to say, but it certainly was an interesting experience. Thanks for reading. I was 14 when I first saw my apparition. It was my grandfather. Almost 2 years later, I saw my second apparition, and it was my last. It was an early morning late in January when I was awakened by cold air on my face. There's nothing unusual about cold air when it was January in Pennsylvania, especially back when half the homes were still heated with coal. As I struggled to open my eyes, I remember thinking, this isn't a draft. Someone is breathing on me. What I saw when I opened my eyes terrified me and still gives me chills when I'm alone late at night. There, in the sparse light of a winter's dawn, I opened my eyes to see a black-robed, hooded figure leaning over me. I couldn't distinguish a face, but truthfully, I didn't want to. I was absolutely paralyzed. After what seemed hours, I finally was able to move enough to do the only thing I could have thought to do: pull the covers over my head. That is how I awoke several hours later. I remember noticing my bed was nowhere near any windows, which would have explained the concentration of cold air. I was, and still am certain it wasn't a dream. The whole experience shook me so much that for months every night before I fell asleep, I'd pray that I'd never see that or any other supernatural being again, which I haven't. I didn't talk about it until I mentioned it to my sister-in-law a month later. She believed in the supernatural, and I knew that she wouldn't laugh at me. I thought that she'd tell me that I probably had dreamt it, but after I'd finished, she looked at me thoughtfully and said she had seen the figure shortly before her mother died. Then she quickly added not to worry about it. 2 months later, my father died of cardiac arrest. At that time, the illustration of the Grim Reaper wasn't as popular as it is today. As a matter of fact, it was several years later when I saw a depiction on TV that I realized that was the figure I saw. Almost 20 years later, my teenage daughter and her friends were on their way upstairs, not the house of my early morning visitor, when suddenly, my daughter called me. Judging from the urgency in her voice, I knew something was wrong. Her friend stood at the top of our open staircase, staring down in horror. The story was, as she followed my daughter to her room, she felt compelled to look behind her. She claimed that halfway down the stairs was a black-robed, hooded figure with no visible face, leaning on the outside banister, its head on its arms as though grieving. Hiding my panic, I tried to calm her. After she went home, I questioned my daughter whether she had told her friend about my experience. She swore up and down she hadn't, and I know I had never told the girl. Less than a week later, her grandmother died. Whatever it is, I don't care to see it again. As I said, that was the last thing I've seen, but, and this will get a big laugh, I've heard voices and unexplainable noises. But that's another story. Thanks for reading. This is a true story that my mother told me a long time ago, and is one she would like to forget. My mom and a couple of my aunts decided to take a well-deserved, or so they say, holiday, and arranged to stay in a supposedly beautiful cottage. But when they arrived, they knew something was wrong. It was as if the house was the very definition of gloom. The old building towered in front of them, giving off a sense of darkness despite the warm, sunny summer day. No one spoke, all stunned. My mom led the way inside, the beginning of a day of terror. Later that day, one of my aunts came in after a shopping trip to the local village when she looked a little bewildered. She said that the local people had ignored her when they heard where they were staying, except for one woman who had begged them to leave the house. There was one bedroom in the house that led the way to the bathroom, so like it or not, everyone had to pass through it to get to the toilet. When my mom went into the room, the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end, and right from the second the door was open, she could feel the coldness of the room, more like an uneasiness lingering in the air, but showing itself by chilling the bedroom. Everyone was scared and decided to leave the next morning. That night, as silence once again filled the cottage and the lights were turned off, one of my aunts began to scream as her bed began to shake violently and would lift up and slam down. It stopped suddenly. Everyone had decided not to sleep in the room that led to the bathroom, so it seemed that it wasn't the only bedroom that was haunted. They all got ready as quick as they could and left in the early hours of the morning. It was a very frightening experience for those who were in the house that day. Thanks for reading. I work at a major museum in the Midwest, and I always thought that my dream job would be to work there because I always enjoyed learning the history behind it. It is a very large museum, and it is certainly great to meet all the different visitors that we get, but it's an unwritten law that we can never discuss anything that may happen to us because it would take away the purpose of the visit there. It was a very slow morning in January, and I was all alone in the building reading to myself and trying not to fall asleep when I heard footsteps above my head. There is only one set of stairs that led to the second floor, and I was sitting next to the padlocked door. I started to try not to run screaming out of the building and to start breathing again when they suddenly stopped. I shook the padlock, certain that it was locked, and I decided that it was time to relax by the front of the store, my common escape. As I stood on the steps, I started to relax a little, and by then, more people were entering the village, So I forgot the incident and told scads of people about the building who worked in it, etc. When around noon, as I was locking up for lunch, I heard them running up and down the stairs behind the door again. This time I just slammed the door and ran next to the other building I was relieving the workers in. I didn't think that the footsteps would follow me. I mean, it is a completely separate building in a different time period. I was wrong. I told the ladies in the other building that they had an hour break, and then I described what had happened to me. They spent the next 20 minutes trying to coax anything that may have haunted the building to appear so they could see it themselves. Well, nothing happened. I was extremely freaked out, and then they went to lunch. As expected, nothing happened for another few minutes, and just as the adrenaline in my body was settled down to normal, I heard them again. All I could think was, they're here. So now, I was sitting across from another set of stairs that again led to the second floor of the house, but these stairs had a velvet rope across them because of fire codes, so no one could go upstairs. So, I'm staring at these inaccessible stairs, watching the window curtains sway. There's no heat in any of these buildings, so it couldn't have been a register or a door. They were all closed. I felt as if I were going to have a heart attack and die. I started to feel faint from fear when a family came in and asked me to show them the house. I did, and they quickly left, but I did have enough presence of mind to notice that when they were in the house, the curtains stopped swaying and the footsteps stopped. I also had asked if anyone in the groups had had a child escape and run upstairs. Every group said no, but I just couldn't believe what was going on. Needless to say, I spent a majority of my time that day on the porch of the home, waiting anxiously for the other employees to come back so I could leave. I don't work in that division of the museum anymore, but I did work those buildings several more times, and the footsteps never happened again. I wonder why they decided to on that particular day. This story did not happen to me. It happened to my mother. I did check with her and verify the details, so it is accurate. Unfortunately, I must be a little vague about the details of time, place, and names in order to honor a promise made by my parents at the time these events occurred. When I was an infant, my parents lived in the same mid-sized, Midwestern town they had both been born in. They had a circle of friends they had known collectively and respectively for years. Part of that group was my dad's best high school friend, whom I will call Bill. My dad and Bill were very close, and to this day, my dad gets a little quiet when his name comes up. Bill was unmarried and had been dating a woman, let's call her Lillian, who was not very popular with his friends or family. She was considered sorta crazy, neurotic, given the fits of rage and wild behavior. Bill and Lillian were pretty much in the outs as a couple, but were at that ending stage of their relationship where they still got together occasionally, usually resulting in a fight. One night, Bill and Lillian went out and ended up having an argument. She was driving the car they were in, and due to her anger, she was driving way too fast and had an accident. While she was relatively unharmed, Bill was thrown from the car and killed. Here's the part about the promise made by my parents. Bill had some medical tests done a day or so before he died. The lab results didn't come back until after his death, and they revealed that Bill had kidney cancer. It was unlikely he would have had a long or healthy life. His parents made everyone promise they would never reveal this to Lillian, however, because they never wanted her to feel guiltiness about causing the accident that killed their son. They considered her crazy enough that she might decide she'd done him and everyone else a favor and absolve herself of any responsibility. And now, here comes the ghost part. A day or so before his funeral, she got off an elevator in an office building, the old-fashioned one that still had an operator, and turned around to see him standing in the back of the elevator. He just stared, without expression, she said, and then the doors closed. My mom said she was sorta shocked, but still went about her business. A couple of weeks later, she saw him in a car next to hers at a red light. She said she looked over and he was sitting in the back seat with several other occupants of that car, who seemed to be entirely unaware of their extra passenger, and she could see right through him to the other people in the seat. But the most touching and personal episode occurred early one morning, about a month after Bill's death. My father had already left for work, and the baby, me, had been fed and had gone back to sleep. My mom was taking advantage of the quiet time to read in bed. Suddenly, she looked up, and Bill was standing in the door of her bedroom, and again, she could see through him. There was no mistaking who it was, though. My mom sort of started and said, "Bill," in a kind of wondering way. He reached out his hand to her and said, although not out loud, she just heard his voice in her head, "I'll miss you. I'll miss you all." Then he kind of gave a wistful, rueful smile and sort of shrugged and disappeared. Not gradually, nor did he walk away, just 1 minute there and 1 minute not. She walked over to where he had been and stood there, and while it was not colder or warmer, she said it felt different. She was not in the slightest bit frightened, just sad about the way things had turned out. This was the last sighting she had of Bill. We hope he knows how much my father cared for him. My name is Daniel, and I am 15 years old. I was born and raised in Maryland, but we moved to Kentucky 2 years ago. This story is about when my mom and I went to visit my 20-year-old sister in Baltimore. She had a roommate, and 4 kids lived there. My sister's daughter, her roommate's 2 daughters, and my other sister. We arrived late at night, around 9 p.m., and on the way, everyone was trying to convince me and my mom that the house was haunted. Well, I believe in the paranormal, but it takes a lot to frighten me. Well, that night, we were all playing around and I fell asleep on the couch downstairs, while everyone else was upstairs. My sister and their roommates were late birds. They never went to sleep till 3 a.m. While I was sleeping, something woke me up by tugging on my sheets. I thought it was my sister playing a joke on me, but when I woke up, no one was there. This didn't really bother me, so I went back to sleep. In the morning, my sister's 11-year-old roommate woke me up because she was going to school. I asked her why they tried to wake me up last night, and she insisted they didn't. The day passed by very fast, and it was around 7 p.m. when they decided to tell us the story of what had been happening. As it turned out, a guy across the street told them the house had been a butcher's place, but the butcher was a very mean person, and everyone believed he killed people. Nobody knew his name, they just called him the Man. They told me my 2-year-old niece was the first to see the man one day while Sandy, my sister, was cleaning up. My niece had just told someone to leave her alone, and my sister turned around to see who she was talking to, but no one was even near her. Still, my niece kept saying "go away" and "leave me alone" to the wind. Another incident happened when my niece told her mommy that the man had hit her. This might have not seemed real, but when my niece showed my sister her back, my sister found teeth and hand marks on her. This freaked my sister out, but that's not the end of the story. We were all sitting at a table playing cards while my sister was cleaning. All of a sudden she yelled, "Ouch, you little bastard," because something hit her and she thought I threw it. At this point, I was playing cards with my mom and the others. Still, I was skeptical until the next night when I was forced to believe. I was alone and my family went out. I didn't feel like going, which was a big mistake that I've regretted ever since. Everyone was supposed to return, but they never did that night. I was watching television when something fell in the kitchen. I thought the cat had broken something, so I went in to see what happened, but found nothing broken. But I did see someone run upstairs, thinking someone stayed behind. I followed them, or it. I got to the top of the stairway, but once again, no one was there. I tried to turn on the light, but it didn't work. I decided to walk a little further down the hallway, and then something grabbed me, and I heard a horrible raging scream that sounded like it came from a man. I was really frightened and turned completely white. I tried to turn around, but the flashlight went out. I tapped it in my hands, but it was still broken. I tried to run, but something grabbed a hold of me. It turned me over and started hitting me and clawing at me. Something or someone was attacking me. I covered up my face, but it hurt and I couldn't break free. It had me. Then it pulled me further down the hallway. I was clawing at the floor and hoping I would die right now. Please God, kill me, have mercy on me, was all I could think. Somehow, I broke free and ran, but when I got to the steps, it got me back and pushed me down the steps. When I turned over and looked up, All I could see was that there was a shadow over me. I must have fainted. When I came to my mom, a police officer and my sister was standing over me. It seems the neighbor heard me screaming and came over to check. When he found me, I was out cold and my clothes were all torn off. He had taken me back to his place and called the police. They wouldn't believe me. They took it as a simple breaking and entering case. I still dream of the incident. It might sound untrue from your end, but trust me, it happened, and I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. When my grandfather and grandmother were first married, around the early 1900s, they lived on a farm in Kentucky. This farm, it seems, housed more than your normal farm animals. At night, in the attic, you could hear large pieces of furniture being moved back and forth across the floor, very rapidly. Needless to say, they wouldn't bother checking it out until daylight, but when they did, nothing at all was in the attic. It was completely empty. Out back of the house, there was a wood pile where all the wood for the heating and cooking was split and stacked. Very late at night, you could hear someone or something out there chopping wood. The morning's investigation turned up my grandfather's axe in the same exact spot he had left it the day before, and not a single stack of wood out of place. One night, my grandfather felt especially brave. This courage brought on by some homemade moonshine, so when he heard the commotion at the woodpile, he started on the porch and yelled out, "Chop, you SOB, chop!" Well, apparently, the thing heard him, and it began to chop faster and faster to the point where it was chopping at an inhuman rate of speed. My grandfather hightailed it into the house, grabbed his shotgun, and sat up scared out of his wit for the rest of the night. It goes without saying, my grandfather never teased it again while they lived there, which wasn't very long. Only my grandfather and grandmother lived on this farm, and at that time, they had no children nor hired hands working on the farm to account for these very strange happenings. This story still bothers me every day, so I'm going to get to the scary part first. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday morning, and I was walking past Tony's house. Tony is very introverted, but a good friend of mine nonetheless. Tony and his family were out of town for the 4th of July weekend, and it was his sister's birthday, so I knew for a fact that nobody was home. Nobody. In fact, I had the keys to his house. His family trusts us, so I was walking back from the night shift at work when I passed by his house. I glanced over at his house, and what I saw made my heart almost stop. I saw a glowing blue figure of a woman, and she was moaning Tony. And I remember distinctly it was a Spanish accent. I jetted home and told my mother about the experience, and of course she thought I was nuts, but even so, she did call their house and got no answer. The following Monday, Tony got back from his trip. I approached him and casually asked, "Who was that old lady in the window Thursday night?" To which he said, "What, are you burnt?" I told him I really saw someone, but when I didn't get any straight answers, I approached his mother and asked her who that old lady in the window Thursday was. But before she answered, my blood ran cold. I glanced over at a picture of an elderly lady, and then I asked his mother, "Who is that lady?" To which his mother replied, "That's my mother. She died years ago, and she had a Spanish accent." I told her that the lady I'd seen last Thursday was her. She was shocked, and she told me that her mother died of a stroke just after she found out her son lost his eye. Thanks for reading. This is a true story that has been witnessed by probably hundreds of people over the years. It happened at Stewart Indian School in Carson City, Nevada, a school founded in the early 1900s, as best that I remember, and closed down my freshman year of high school. The student body was made up of American Indian kids from various areas on the West Coast. The land where the campus was situated is really large, and on this huge area of land is the main school building, also large in 2 stories, a gym, a post office, medical and dental clinic, and many little outlying structures which were the various men's and women's dorms. There were some freestanding homes as well. There was also an auto shop, paint shop, etc. It would have taken a good 10 to 20 minutes to walk the length of this campus from one end to the other. Since the school is so old, the campus is full of large trees and many lonely, deserted walkways. There is more than one spooky story, but this is one I will never forget. Since the guys and gals that attended Stewart Indian School had to move away from home and live in the dorms, there were, of course, great love affairs, and well, sometimes we all know how those can turn out. This story involves a young couple who were in a really intense relationship. They had been dating and depended on each other for just about everything. I'm not sure when this all occurred, since this is a haunting that has gone on for years. Eventually, the girl got pregnant and told her boyfriend. They were both really scared and were afraid to let anyone know, since they would both be sent home, back to their own reservations, and they would be split up, so they just kept quiet about it. After a while, it got to be too much for the boy involved, and he started seeing another girl on campus. Since his girlfriend had thought he would marry her and they would raise the baby together, this new development devastated her. She went into a deep depression, and since she was pregnant, she didn't have much time until all was found out. The girl had a lot to worry about. She only had dated this one person, and to top it off, she had thin skin. Unfortunately, she couldn't face it and hung herself from a rafter in the gym. She was found there by some of the students and faculty who cut her down. A few weeks later, the first sightings of the Peanut Lady started to occur. The reason they call her the Peanut Lady is because her skin was scarred from her acne and had the appearance of a peanut shell. The Peanut Lady is usually seen walking along the cement pathways around campus, but you will only see her if you are alone. She has been seen both during the day and night. Many times, people would see her from behind, her long black hair hanging down, but when she would turn around, she wouldn't have a face. Pretty soon, things took a turn for the worst. People who saw the Peanut Lady started to have misfortunes befall them not long afterwards. People who viewed her ended up having a car accident or getting into some kind of other trouble. After a few years, people started being afraid to venture out after dark or to go alone to the gym or the library for fear of seeing the Peanut Lady. Anyone who ever attended Stewart Indian School has heard the stories, and some report seeing her walking in the dorm hallways or walking around the campus. Some have even reported seeing her hanging from the ceiling in the gym. The only thing they all had in common is right after seeing the Peanut Lady, they all had something bad happen to them, usually involving bodily injury. I personally never saw the Peanut Lady, thank God, but I know those who have. And out of those, one person was shot by accident. He ended up living. Another died in a car crash with her infant daughter. How many more saw her? I don't know, but Stewart Indian School is still there with all the buildings intact. Some of them are being used by the federal government as office space. The high school is used by the local community college. You can find it off Highway 395 South in Carson City. Just don't go there alone. There is a door that separates this world from the next. Some people pass through this door on a regular basis, while others do not even acknowledge its existence. Behind this door are the spooky shadows, bad dreams, ghosts of love lost, and all the things that are slightly out of sync with reality. I've been through this door many times in my life, especially when I was a child. I would like to share with you, the readers of ghost stories, a trilogy of my experience on the other side of this door. My first journey through the door was when I was a very young child. I used to have a reoccurring dream in which an old lady was sitting in an old Victorian-style chair, the ones upholstered in velvet and patterned in ornamental wood carvings. The old lady, in the dream, was eating a bowl of chicken soup. She would stare at me with the most benevolent look between bites. For some reason, the aroma of the chicken soup was very offensive to me, and I would always wake up crying. I've never understood this because chicken soup is one of my favorite foods. It was like viewing my dream in a moment of frozen time. She was eating the bowl of soup just like in the dream. Instantly, I became a goose. My body was covered from head to toe with goosebumps. Of course, I asked my grandmother who the person was in the picture. She replied, "That was your great-grandmother." The next thing she told me never really hit me until I was a few years older. The picture was taken by my mother when she was pregnant with me, and that my great-grandmother had died just a few weeks before I was born. I never knew my great-grandmother in my daily life, but somehow, in my dreams, she made herself known to me. So I asked myself, did I see my great-grandmother from the womb, or was it her way of introducing herself from behind the door? This next story involves my younger brother, Bill, and my grandfather. Bill, my impish little brother, created a new chapter in the haunted legacy of my family. My grandmother and brother were very close. In fact, they were together almost all the time while my grandfather was healthy. I was overwhelmed with jealousy. I could never be a part of their little games and gatherings. My brother could sense my anguish and would taunt and tease me by saying things like, "Papa doesn't like you and he loves me." Oh, how I wanted to beat the shit out of that guy. Fortunately for him, I never did. Then one day, my mother had to take Bill to the doctor, and I was alone with my grandfather. I was very angry at him and wouldn't talk to him. I guess I wanted him to reach out to me, or maybe I was just being the child that I was. Anyway, he finally won me over. He sat me on his knee and gave me a good talking to. He said, "Sonny, I know you think that I don't love you, but there's something I must tell you. I'm very sick, and I'm not going to be around much longer. I want you to know that I love all of my grandchildren the same. The reason I spend so much time with Billy is because he's the baby of the family, and I want him to know and understand who his grandfather was and is." He really didn't have much more to say because, even though I was only 11, I felt like I could sit on the edge of a dime and swing my feet. A few months later, my grandfather passed away. My brother had a hard time accepting my grandfather's death, but as with all healthy children, he finally did. After the family had adjusted to the loss, there was all this talk about a gold watch. Nobody could find my grandfather's gold watch. I was given the 3rd degree. My mother was questioned, and one of my aunts was accused of taking his watch for a keepsake. The only one not questioned was Bill. Then one day, my grandmother was cleaning our room. She picked up a pair of Bill's trousers, and out came the watch. She immediately questioned him about it. All my brother would say was that Papa gave him the watch last week. My grandmother just about beat him to death, but he never would change his story, even until this day. My grandmother was about to have a nervous breakdown because she could not believe Bill. That is, my grandfather had been dead for well over a month. So, how did he get it? It was locked up in their little metal box they had kept important papers and stuff in. Did my grandfather briefly walk through that door to give his little favorite grandson his most prized possession? Not sure. This last story involves my brother and grandfather. Not long after the watch incident, something else happened that truly made me a believer in ghosts. We all were getting ready to eat supper one night, and my brother Bill was playing near the dining room door. I was watching him, not really caring one way or the other of what he was doing. Suddenly, I saw his face literally glow with delight. He opened the door, and the cold January air rushed into the room. My grandmother yelled, "William, close that door now." "I can't, Grandma. Papa is coming up the porch, and I have to let him in." My heart jumped to my throat. I was scared to even look towards the door. Billy was having a tantrum because my mother and grandmother was holding him down. He fought with the valiancy of a Spartan. "I want my papa! I want my papa!" he cried. "I have to let him in. Please let him in." As long as I live, I will never forget that incident. I don't know if it was Bill's loud screaming or the fact that he really did see my grandfather that scared me the most. We all grew up and had our times, but I still wonder, did my dead grandfather open the door just one more time? Because that was the last time we had ever heard from him. Thanks for reading. As I've mentioned in previous posts, this area of the country is remote, has a troubled past and present, and is in general a hotspot for spirit activity. The history of Pine Ridge is loaded with superstition and hauntings. let's start on the road to Pine Ridge, and I will begin a story that you will never forget. Anyone who grew up in Pine Ridge during the 60s and 70s knows better than to pick up hitchhikers on the way home. One of the most heavily trafficked roads in the area is between Rapid City and Pine Ridge. The trip usually takes about an hour one way, and much of the trip is over large, desolate areas. Oftentimes, as people were on the way back to Pine Ridge, they would spot a solitary hitchhiker trying to catch a ride back to the res. Now, everybody knew that there was a devil who used to try and catch rides. Many people spoke of seeing hitchhikers, but they wouldn't pick them up. But every once in a while, someone would let their guard down and pull over. One evening, a group of friends from Pine Ridge were on their way back from Rapid City. As they drove along the highway, they saw a lone man, a white man standing along the side of the road trying to hitch a ride. Keep in mind, seeing a lone white man hitching a ride towards the reservation is an unusual sight. Curiosity got the better of the friends, and they persuaded the driver to pull over. After they picked him up, they resumed their trip home. Nothing unusual happened, at least nothing more unusual than having a white man in your car. As they drove along, at first, everything was fine. The group kept on joking and laughing and even gave the stranger a beer. But after a few miles, they started to feel uncomfortable. Finally, after they were on the res, the white man asked to be let out of the car. The driver gladly pulled over, and the stranger opened the door and got out. As he walked away, there was one unusual thing about him that they all noticed at once. He had a funny way of walking. As his feet came into view, they understood why. He was walking on little goat feet. This story occurs in a movie theater in Savannah, Georgia, where myself and Patricia worked. This theater was built on the land of an old plantation, so it seems fitting that it should be haunted, and so it is. I was working as a ticket seller and Trisha was working as a projectionist. Each night, when the last movies were started, my shift was basically finished, and so I would usually clock out and go up to the projection booth to keep Trisha company, seeing as how she had to stay until the movies were done. The booth is very long to accommodate 10 projections. Also, it tended to be very dark. We'd mostly sit up there and talk, roleplay, and basically goof around. During these talks, we traded stories of things that happened to us with the resident ghost. For instance, while the movies are showing, there isn't much for a ticket seller to do, and you can't leave your little cubicle filled with lots of money, so I'd read a book or draw. Mind you, nowhere near the buttons that pump out the tickets. Well, my machine would regularly pump out tickets when I was not paying enough attention. Mostly this irritated me because I'd have to get my manager to either void the tickets or gain permission to sell it for the next showings. One of my duties consisted of checking the ladies' room to make sure it was clean and well stocked. The nozzles for the water controls were such that they were timed. You'd push them down and they'd stay on for only so long. Many times, I walked in there while shows were running to find all the sinks running with no one having been in there. One of my scariest experiences was with Theater 9. It was the last theater on the right, directly next to the door leading out to the side parking lot where the employees would park. I was on my way out from work after a long shift with another cashier when we noticed the exit lights were blinking in that theater alone. This meant a fire alarm had gone off, but there would have been a very loud buzzer as well as all the exit signs in every theater blinking and buzzing. The movies were all out and no patrons were left, so myself and the other cashier decided to check this one out. We were kinda spooked, so we poked out our heads in the theater cautiously. The temperature in that theater only had dropped to the point we could see our breath, and the lights to the exit signs were silently blinking away at us. We panicked and ran out, saying to each other that the place could burn if it wanted to. Our manager had to check the security systems the next day, and there was no reason the signs could have done what they did. After that, I never cleaned Theater 9 alone, even though that was the theater that yielded the most lost money for some reason. Trisha told me her own story from the projection booth. At the far end of the booth is a door leading to a fire escape. It cannot be opened from the outside, and there is only one access to the booth. One of our favorite games when we're bored was to sneak upstairs while the projectionist was threading games and scare the bejesus out of her. Trish caught onto this game after many a time of leaping out of her skin, so would pay extra close attention while doing her job. One day while threading movies, she heard the door to the fire escape close, and assuming it was our assistant manager, quickly ran to the door to catch him in the act, as he had 3 flights of metal stairs to run down. When she opened the door with a triumphant grin, no one was anywhere to be seen. Needless to say, she called down to the office, which is in the center of the building, nowhere near the fire escape, and he was in there counting my money drawer for the day where we had been for the past 15 minutes. After that, Trisha took a short break. So those are my movie theater stories. I have some stories from when I worked at a professional dinner theater that I may submit to you at a later date. I've sent in a couple of other stories before, and I've held on to this one until this moment. Why? Because until we recently moved, and the fact that we still lived in the house where this happened, but now I can share it. The house we used to live in here in Pilot Mountain, Mount Pilot to Andy Griffith fans, was a split level. We remodeled it and enclosed the garage to make it a family room. When we did, I moved from the upstairs bedroom to the basement into a little mini apartment. From there, I could hear everything going on in the upstairs bedrooms. I could even tell where the walls dividing the rooms were because no one walked in that area and there were no footsteps. My dad often tried to convince us that something or someone was in the house. We just thought he was trying to scare us and laughed about it. He would say that every morning around 3 a.m. or so, whatever it was would walk down the steps from the upstairs bedrooms, into the kitchen, and out into what was the garage, which is now the family room. He knew this because his favorite sleeping spot was in a recliner that was located in the family room, and he would witness it every morning around 3 a.m. So, I called it the 3 a.m. ghost, laughingly. But, one night, I witnessed it firsthand. It wasn't anywhere near 3 a.m. though. It was about 11 p.m. My dad had a job that forced him to work screwy hours, sometimes late at night, and this was one of them. My mom, my little sister, who was just a baby at the time, and myself were in the family room watching TV. My eyes got so heavy, so I decided to call it a night. I said goodnight to everybody and went to bed. I had no more than crawled under the covers when I heard footsteps pacing upstairs. I assumed it to be Mom putting my sister to bed, but the pacing footsteps continued. Then, I noticed something. The footsteps were coming from right where the wall was. Whatever it was passing from one bedroom to the next by going through the wall. It had to because the only doors in the 2 rooms were the closet doors, and the closets were not connected, and the entrance doors, which were on different walls at 90-degree angles from one another. I jumped from bed, threw on some clothes, and ran up to the family room where Mom sat engrossed in an episode of ER. My sister was on the couch beside her, asleep. I asked Mom if she had been upstairs. She said no, she hadn't moved in 30 minutes or more. So, with my heart pounding like a snare drum, I crept up the steps, still hearing the footsteps, now accompanied by a slow, heavy breathing sound. When I reached the top of the stairs, it stopped, and I never heard it again. My grandfather had died some time before. He was a good Christian man, adored by everyone. His loss hurt us all deeply, but none deeper than my mother. She loved her father more than anything that there ever was on this planet. He had a tendency to breathe slow and heavy. Thus, my mom thoroughly believes that the 3 a.m. ghost was her father, who looked after Mom in life like he did none of his other children, and now he is looking out for her in death. I hope to have some more tales in the coming weeks, and believe me, they're as scary as can be. Please stay tuned, and thank you for my read. When I was about 17, my mom would sometimes drag me along on her religious activities, and it just so happened that on this particular day, she took me to a house blessing where a little girl was having dreams about some doll chasing her. Anyways, we all get there and pray as the priest is blessing the house, going from room to room. Finally, when he's done, we all go outside to the garage, and it's here where the owner of the house brings out some stuff he found in the garage that was left by the previous owners. He pulls out this black leather-bound book and a small bottle made into a doll, and it's when he shows everyone the doll that the little girl screams that it was the same doll that was chasing her in her dreams. At this point, I'm getting a little freaked out, but think that maybe she's a little brat and just wanted to scare everyone. So then, the priest examines the doll in the book, and the book turns out to be the book of satanic rituals of something of the like. Well, They placed the book on the sidewalk at the top of the cul-de-sac and tried to burn it, and this is where I got scared. Finally, everyone made a circle around the book and started praying while 4 people went and lit one corner of the book, and finally, the fire caught and the book started to burn, but very slowly. In an effort to make the book burn more quickly, the owner of the house poured some gasoline on the book. Yeah, I was standing back at this point, and when the gasoline hit the book, there was a flash of flame rising, and the gas was repelled all around the book, and where the gas fell, small flames rose. This made all the hair on my back of my neck stand on end. The book finally burned after much prayer. Ah, deja vu. I feel like I've heard these stories before somewhere. Where the hell have I... Oh, I heard it on your channel before. Phantom, why are you reading the same stories over again? Because, sir and madam, this is a compilation. Welcome, guys. Welcome to my first compilation I've ever finished. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. I know this was a highly requested video of sorts. You guys really wanted a compilation, and I brought it to you for the first time ever. So please don't forget to hit the like button, comment, subscribe, and share, because on Monday, we're coming back with a new video. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show before you start looking like Sloppy Joe from head to toe. This guy is the corniest man who ever lived, and I think if you survive that joke, you are a true soldier, a soldier of love. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. Again, good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. And it won't be a compilation, I promise.